Hello everyone. Welcome back to True Revenge Scene for another story, and thank you for all the love and support. I asked my wife not to dance with him at the gala. What will happen? She laughed. But I wasn't joking. And as the music rose around us, she slowly realized the stage I had prepared wasn't meant for entertainment. It was meant for a reckoning she never expected. The annual charity gala was the biggest social event of the year. A ballroom overflowing with shimmering silk, expensive champagne, and the kind of polished smiles that conceal 1,000 quiet grudges. My wife, Maya, looked breathtaking in a deep lavender gown, yet her focus never left the man across the room, Ethan, the charming investor who had circled our lives for months like a predator waiting patiently. I had seen the lingering touches, the inside jokes, and the late-night messages lighting up her phone before she quickly erased them. As the orchestra began a slow, sweeping waltz, I leaned close and whispered, "Maya, please don't dance with him tonight. Let's just enjoy this evening together, just once." She didn't even turn toward me. Instead, she laughed softly, a musical sound that landed like a slap. "Don't be so possessive, Liam. It's just a dance. What will happen? Is the world going to collapse because of a 3-minute song?" She teased, her eyes already fixed on Ethan as he made his way over. She believed I was still the same quiet, compliant husband who would sit alone with a drink while she displayed her disrespect in front of our professional circle. What she didn't know was that for 3 weeks, I had been doing more than nursing wounded pride. I had been carefully auditing the charity accounts she claimed to care about, uncovering proof that her relationship with Ethan extended far beyond the dance floor. Ethan arrived at our table with a confident, smug smile that chilled me. "May I have this dance, Maya?" he asked, barely acknowledging my existence. Maya rose with dramatic flair, flipping her hair and casting me a final mocking glance. "See you in 3 minutes, Liam. Try not to look so miserable," she whispered, before taking his hand and gliding to the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted, their chemistry obvious, and for a brief moment, they looked like the evening's golden couple. But as the violins swelled, I stood and walked calmly toward the tech booth at the back of the hall, my fingers closing around the USB drive in my pocket. The real program for the night. Through the glass, I watched them spin gracefully, leaning close to exchange secrets they believed were hidden beneath the music. She had asked what would happen. I was about to give her a very clear answer. I nodded to the technician, a young man I had compensated well to ensure the presentation ran smoothly. The music continued, but the massive projector screens surrounding the ballroom flickered to life. The charity's logo vanished, replaced by high-definition security footage I had obtained from Ethan's consulting office. The room shifted from polite chatter to a thunderous collective gasp as guests watched Maya and Ethan doing far more than dancing. The waltz carried on for a few painful seconds, the orchestra unaware of the destruction unfolding behind them. Then whispers spread, fingers pointed, and the music faltered before stopping completely, leaving only the heavy silence of 300 stunned witnesses. Maya and Ethan stood frozen at the center of the floor, his hands still on her waist, their bodies illuminated by glowing proof of betrayal. The excitement on Maya's face drained into a pale mask of horror as she saw herself displayed on the towering screen, caught in a grainy yet undeniable embrace inside Ethan's private office. She wasn't laughing anymore. The question she had mocked moments earlier was now being answered with surgical precision. I stepped out from the shadows of the booth and walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting like I was entering a courtroom. Every gaze shifted between me, her, and the screens, now scrolling through records of charity donations that had been funneled into a private offshore account in both their names. They hadn't only betrayed me, they had stolen from the very foundation being honored that night. Ethan tried to recover, stepping protectively in front of her. "Liam, turn it off. You're causing a scene. This is private property," he shouted, his voice cracking, his polished confidence crumbling. But neither I nor the screen stopped. I reached the edge of the dance floor and looked at Maya, who was shaking so hard the sequins on her gown shimmered like frantic sparks. "You asked what would happen, Maya," I said, my voice steady in the silent hall. "What's happening is that the truth is finally louder than your laughter." from a dumpster. I realized then that she was likely watching from somewhere. A prepaid phone in a cheap motel, waiting for headlines announcing my arrest. She didn't just want the end of our marriage, she wanted my complete destruction. I asked Miller to check the GPS records from my car 2 years earlier. It was a feature I had installed for insurance reasons, something Sarah had always mocked as unnecessary. I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes as he wrote it down. For the first time since they arrived at my door, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe the stability and attention to detail she had once ridiculed would be what unraveled her plan. As the hours passed, the investigators began noticing something unsettling. The evidence was almost too perfect. The watch hadn't been hidden. It had been placed inside Elias's jacket pocket, as if waiting to be found. When Miller returned, his expression had changed. They had traced the IP addresses used to post on Elias's accounts. Though the posts appeared to come from across the globe, the metadata showed they were routed through a VPN tied to an account Sarah had opened under her maiden name. The digital ghost was starting to unravel. The more they examined her supposed travels, the clearer it became that she had never left the state. I was no longer just a suspect. I had been the bait in a far more elaborate trap. And finally, the police were beginning to focus on the woman who had spent 2 years pretending her victim was still alive. The breakthrough came late that night, when the digital trail Sarah had so carefully hidden finally began to fall apart under a full forensic investigation. She had been smart enough to use a VPN, but arrogance led her to make one critical mistake. She used the high-speed Wi-Fi at a local library to upload several vacation photos to Elias's account. Believing she would blend in among students and retirees, she didn't consider the security cameras. Footage from that exact hour showed Sarah wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses, seated at a corner computer with a laptop matching the one later recovered from a dumpster. The police no longer had just a theory. They had clear visual proof of her carrying out the deception. Ironically, the stable husband she tried to frame became the one who provided the technological roadmap that guided investigators straight to her. Her arrest took place at a run-down motel on the edge of the county, a place that reeked of stale smoke and broken dreams. Sarah did not surrender quietly. She shouted at the officers, claiming I had pushed her into the affair and that Elias's death was an accident I had helped cover up. But her accusations rang empty against the overwhelming evidence the detectives had gathered with my help. Inside her motel room, they discovered a notebook filled with repeated practice signatures of my name and a detailed outline of my daily schedule. She had been watching me for months, waiting for the body to surface so she could witness my life fall apart from the front row. Her obsession with destroying me had become her entire purpose. And now, that same obsession would ensure she spent the rest of her life behind bars. The trial became a media spectacle, but I attended only the session where my testimony was required. Seeing her in an orange jumpsuit, her hair unkempt, and the fierce spark in her eyes replaced with a cold, lifeless stare, did not bring the satisfaction I once imagined. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The woman I had once loved was finally removed from my life, both legally and physically. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict for first-degree murder and felony framing. In his closing remarks, the judge stated that her calculated cruelty was among the most disturbing he had witnessed in 3 decades on the bench. As officers escorted her away, she tried to lock eyes with me. One final attempt to maintain control, I simply glanced at my watch. A new one, purchased with my own hard-earned money, and stepped into the sunlight. 2 years after the police first knocked on my door, I am living a life no longer defined by shadows. I sold the suburban house and moved to a small cabin near the lake, a quiet place visited only by birds and the occasional deer. I have learned that the truth does more than set you free. It shields you from those who try to twist your past into a weapon. Sarah is now just a name on a prison roster, and the watch she used to try to bury me sits locked in an evidence room. A reminder of a battle I survived by refusing to remain in the grave she dug for me. I am finally at peace, knowing that I alone will write the next chapter of my life, and the ink I use is honest and entirely my own. I'm curious, what part of the country are you listening to this story from? And did you know that nearly 80% of our viewers still haven't subscribed? If you enjoyed this story, please press the subscribe button.